Welcome to the second Let's Talk Business, a collaboration between Alex Petraglia and the Hudson Business Coalition and the Hudson Development Corporation. Some of my fellow board members are here today, Kristen Keck and Paul Barrett, and who else? I think that's it. Jess is working with us too now, just so nice to have you all here. Anyway, I'm very excited about today because we have a very special group of ideas to share with you. Today's topic is tourism, and I'm thrilled to be able to introduce Bob Provost, President and CEO of the New York State Tourism Industry Association. Bob is sitting right here. And he was enthusiastic about joining us today, so I'm happy to have him. The New York State Tourism Industry Association is a 501c3 with a mission of advancing economic growth, job creation, and pride of place by realizing the potential of New York's tourism industry for the benefit of New York's communities. Bob's resume is impressive, and his colleagues speak of him over and over as strategic, an innovative thinker, and naturally entrepreneurial. An acknowledged new business incubator and change agent, his expertise is helping people and organizations identify and achieve their goals. He spent 25 plus years as CMO marketing director with 2 major media properties and as a nonprofit CEO, marked by innovation, revenue deployment, problem solving, process improvement. While strategic marketing efforts for his media employers, Bob also served as pro bono consultant to hundreds of media advertising clients and community nonprofits. His work in marketing, sales, branding, economic development, and community engagement has consistently earned professional and civic recognition. He spent 30 years at Hearst, I'm missing this, Hearst Publishing and Company, chair of Hearst Innovations and New Products, retiring in 2005. But he was too young to retire. So he didn't miss a beat and became the VP of Marketing for the Star Ledger based in Newark, New Jersey. You all know where Newark, New Jersey is, okay? There he reported directly to the publisher, overseeing strategic planning, new and non-traditional revenue deployment, market and product development, and market research, brand strategy, external relations, government, corporate, civic, philanthropy, and development. He did a year as a distinguished executive in residence lecturer at Rutgers Business School, Rutgers University. His appointment was for 1 year to develop, establish, and nurture programs that broaden engagement activities between the business community, faculty, and students, and to provide increased value to Rutgers business partners while improving student and faculty experience. Next, he became the interim CEO, past board chair, and co-founder of Greater Newark Convention and Visitors Bureau. If he can get people to think Newark's a great place to go, to stay overnight, we have a lot to learn from him. Anyway, that's what he did there. And which made this all of this was leading him, I think, as you can see, from his original beginnings to a more of a tourism hospitality kind of mindset, which made for a natural transition to his current position as president and CEO of New York State Travel Industry Association in 2018. When I was researching a good speaker to come and speak to us and give us some pearls of wisdom on the tourism industry as we know it right now, I drilled around on the internet, as we all do, and I came across his organization. And so in my sales background, I love making cold calls. So I would just zap out. I zapped out a couple of emails to 2 people in his organization who looked like they were in charge of development. And I said, please, I hope that you would consider coming. Hudson, New York's a great little town. We're located, blah, blah, blah. I gave my whole speech. And my phone rang the same day. I think it was the same day. I'll give you credit for the same day. And it was Bob. It wasn't the people I sent the emails to. It was the president of the organization. So I immediately felt he's proactive. He's in charge. And I was thrilled to hear from him. We had a few talks back and forth. Our original idea for this series is to have a little TED Talk beginning where an expert talks to you a little bit in detail on a certain topic, retail, so far retail and now tourism. And then if we have an open question and answer period where you can maybe propose some questions to him, and he can maybe propose some ideas for us. So without going on too much longer, I'm just going to say we're thrilled to have him this morning. I'm also thrilled to see so many people coming to these now. We're trying to build up a little bit of an audience and an interest in spending an hour. People say maybe it's too much time, but an hour to an hour and a half talking about the business of the future of Hudson. So thank you so much, Bob.
I think you read my entire LinkedIn profile.
Take it away.
That wasn't what I sent you as a bio.
No.
I sent her like 2 paragraphs and said, feel free to shorten it if you want. I think the important thing to take away from all of that was that I backed into tourism. I did not develop my career in tourism as a tourism professional or as someone focused on tourism. I was Chief Innovations Officer for Hearst. And for those of you who don't know, the media companies, media will survive and flourish only if their market is flourishing. And so Hearst had a lot of properties in markets that were suffering economically, and they were dealing with downturns. And when you say you're the innovations officer, everybody says, oh, they must be the techie. And yeah, I brought internet technology, digital technology. We were the first newspaper to go totally digital in production. I was doing projections with an overhead projector in a theater we built at the Times Union in 1986. The projector weighed about 90 pounds and had to be suspended with supports from the ceiling and focused every time you used it. But the bottom line is, George Hearst said that probably the most profound change we made, the innovation of organizational culture. And we developed a concept long before the words corporate and social responsibility were in the lexicon. It was simply called doing good while doing well. And it was the art of aligning your long-term strategic objectives and plan with community engagement, philanthropy, and volunteerism. The newsroom, as a fourth estate in our society, needs to stay separate and apart, somewhat aloof. They can't carry pom-poms, they can't cheerlead, they have to cover the news objectively. But the business side of Hearst's media units could engage. We just couldn't be news makers. And so the cultural innovation was to turn each property into a catalyst within its market to convene people, to talk about the future of the community, where we're going, what the trajectory is, how do we change it for the better. And we quickly discovered that tourism was the #1 change agent to change the trajectory for the better, to take control of the narrative for your community, and to begin to share a more balanced perspective on your marketplace, your community, your home. So I backed into tourism using it as a tool. When I came after retiring 30 years with Hearst, 10 years with the Newhouse family, I was prepared for a change. And I had also spent 20 years teaching, which is how I ended up as the executive in resident at Rutgers. But I stepped into tourism for one reason. The people who work in tourism, by and large, are passionate about their work and their communities. And they're very, very upbeat people. This was not our logo when I got involved. I created this logo and then vetted it with I Love New York so that they didn't feel there was conflict, and there wasn't. I knew that it didn't violate their copyright. But I put the heart in tourism because that's where the people in tourism truly have their heart. They really want to do well. They're committed to their communities. So, and again, I'm making a sweeping statement. Some people in tourism move from market to market to market, but the vast majority spend their entire career promoting their hometown or their home county or whatever their position is. So we are a 501c6 nonprofit at the vanguard of tourism marketing, stewardship, and long-range thinking. You know, to not think just about the immediate business plan, but where are we going? And proactively, how do we control that path? How do we direct where things are going? We go to the next slide. And I'm in this chair for a reason. I had a bizarre accident where literally a street collapsed as I was crossing it. So I have artificial knees, hips, and spine is fused. So, you know, I can stand, but after about 10 minutes, I need a chair.
This didn't happen this morning.
No. Someone said, "Oh, you're the bionic man." I said, "No, I'm a tin man. Just give me an oil can." They just put in new hinges. I didn't get anything high tech. So what does tourism mean to New York State? And our slogan, which is in the bottom right, this is our advocacy statement. Tourism, it's everybody's business. And we say that because tourism affects every community and every resident in our state. If we go to the next slide. So tourism is kind of the redheaded stepchild of the business world, or as someone my age would put it, we're the Rodney Dangerfield. We get no respect. You know, nobody thinks that tourism is business. Tourism, people, you know, going on vacation, that's not business. Well, it's business meetings, it's conventions, it's building sports arenas, it's really involved in charting the course of your community. It is big business. It is the third largest industry in the state of New York, and it has been the third largest industry for nearly a decade. And the gap between tourism and the rest of the industries is growing, and the gap between tourism and agriculture, which is number 2, is narrowing. It's just growing that big. In fact, 2022 was the best year in the history of New York State tourism. Over $78 billion in visitor spending, with $123 billion in total impact, $40 billion in payroll for New York State jobs, and $10 billion in tax revenue for state and local governments. It is truly big business. But let's take another look at a different perspective, because that's a big picture. What's the next slide? What does tourism mean to Columbia County? It was also a record year in Columbia County. $237 million in 2022. That was $50 million more than 2019, pre-pandemic. And it was $27 million more than 2021. You guys are growing very fast. And that's great on the one hand, and it's fraught with danger on the other hand. Because tourism, in any business, if it runs out of control, well, out of control doesn't usually end well. So how did that break out? You can see the numbers. Nearly $60 million on lodging. Everybody thinks tourism, hotels, but local restaurants, bars, nightclubs, everybody gets a piece of the money. In fact, the hotels only get about 29 cents out of the dollar. And 71 cents of the tourist dollar spent locally goes elsewhere in your local economy. And, we're trying to educate elected leadership, legislators, etc., because they tend to think that if we're going to raise money, we'll tax the hotels. Okay? And that takes a very narrow sector, and it puts them at a disadvantage with other sectors of the economy, but other hotels and other communities as well. You need to understand the benefits of tourism are spread across the entire market. If there's one place you should put some money to support, it's museums. Because museums are in that recreation category. Anything where you're buying admission falls under recreation. And I'm a big fan of museums. But out of the average dollar, they get 9 or 10 cents. Okay, so if you're the museum that draws people to a community, you're getting 9 cents, and the rest of the community, the business community, is getting 91 cents. So it behooves local government, corporate entities, foundations, and other philanthropists to support museums because they drive incredible economics. But, you know, people don't connect the dots. That's why people are here in many cases. So with that came $13 million in county tax revenue that stayed in Hudson County and $106 million in local wages and employment income. Those are big numbers, all right? And typically, you could take the average total visitor spending dollar, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 40% is going to end up coming back to somebody in a paycheck. So if there's $100 million in spending, you can assume that's around $40 million. It'll drive in payroll, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. So tourism, you know, triggers all of these things. I want to go to retail very quickly. Nobody travels to another community so they can shop their Home Depot. Think about it. Tourism is all about small business, which is why I was excited to come down here. You know, it's not inconvenient. It's a little over an hour from where I live, but anytime we can talk to small businesses about the visitor economy and help them understand how to get their piece of that pie, we want to do so and engage with them. As a matter of fact, there's someone from the Chamber of Commerce here, correct?
Yeah.
And the Business Coalition, obviously. We've introduced an every Wednesday webinar program. It's done at lunchtime. It's about a half-hour webinar on good business practice. It's free. It's not just something you could watch. You can share the link with your members and sign in and participate. Tomorrow we'll be doing a program on public relations and earned media and its role in your marketing mix. The week after, on Valentine's Day, we're doing a Valentine's theme program on doing local video to promote your business. So, you know, these are things we want to engage and support small business. It's in our mission statement. So we go to the next slide, and I promise I'll speed up. So, last thing I want to deal with in the big picture is tourism in the municipal budget, the county budget, the state budget, even in the federal budget. There's a tendency in the budget offices to say, oh, well, we can cut tourism. That's really hardly necessary. You know, that's a you know, optional expenditure. But the reality is, for every dollar spent doing it right, every dollar spent on tourism marketing should trigger $24 in spending. So if you think about it, when the legislature, and again, now this year the executive office, they do this dance every year. They take the money out so the other people can argue to put it back in, and it gives them something to negotiate with. They're going to take $1 million out of matching funds for the local county budgets. Well, I called the head of the Senate Committee on Tourism, and I Senate Majority Leader, and the same thing in the Assembly, and I said, if you're going to remove $1 million from the budget, you will probably cut spending by $20 to $24 million. And the state will lose somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.5 to $3 million in tax revenues. So if you're taking $1 million in tourism marketing expenditures out of the budget, take $3 million out of your revenue budget, or you're going to have a deficit. Well, when they connected the dots and we give them lots of examples, they were just amazed. We did a $75,000 program last fall with Expedia, working with several markets in the Hudson Valley. We were able to track the booking of $1.1 million in overnight accommodations. That $1.1 million, if you look at the formula I was talking about, means that the actual true total spending was around $3.6 million, and it generated about $300,000 just in sales tax revenue off of a $75,000 buy. So that's the kind of math we're trying to share to get people to understand. It'll drive increased tax revenues, it lightens the burden on the resident, it creates job and payroll growth, even with that $3.6 million return. That's not a big number, but it probably meant 1.3 million in payroll. All right, and tourism, if it's again done right, will also drive local infrastructure improvements, and we'll come back to that. Can we go to the next slide? So tourism, the big key here is tourism is not a goal. Tourism is a means to an end. Tourism done right drives local job creation, small business success, community revitalization, increased local and state tax revenues, and it results, if you do it right, in an improved standard of living, quality of life, and pride of place for the people who live in the community. You have to remember, if you're the person driving the ship, as it were, in tourism, that your ultimate customer is the resident. That's why you get public funding. It's why you get public support. It's presumably why lots of organizations in the community rally to work with you. So I have launched something that's actually, I'm very proud it's taken root, and it's international at this point. The concept of transformational tourism stewardship. And that is, being proactive. Shape the future. Don't wait for the future to unfold and then react to what's happening, or the future is going to shape you. So transformational tourism stewardship doesn't mean that your local tourism office tells you where we're going. It means that the tourism office should be at the table, and if necessary, be a convener to bring people together and listen and develop a shared vision. Where do we want to go? Okay, we know what the potential is. We have a business plan for next year, maybe the year after. But in 15 years, where do we want our community to be? What's it going to look like? And you have to think that far in advance. The further you look into the future, the more opportunities you have to change the trajectory for the better. You have to have the long view. And there are many constraints to growth and doing tourism right. There's sustainability issues. If you look at our natural resources, the places we love the most get abused the most. Okay? There's workforce development. Do we have enough people with enough skills and the right skills? The infrastructure. Do we have parking for this new facility we're building to draw lots of people? Can the highway handle it? Can the traffic handle it? There are limitations that are never going to be resolved if all you're doing is planning and thinking in the short term. So that's the concept of transformational tourism stewardship. Next slide. So what comes out of transformational tourism stewardship? I did a 1-hour program at the New York State Tourism Conference, which our organization manages. And I brought 12 market leaders to the front of the room in 1 hour, and they each had 5 minutes and 4 slides to tell us what was happening in their market that was transformational. From Utica, they talked about the Nexus Center. They were opening up a 170,000 square foot storage facility, introducing a whole new category of visitation to bring sports competition to the city of Utica. The next one, if we could advance. Folks from Schenectady got up and they talked about the fact that they took the Washington Avenue Armory, which is a wonderful structure, but it was kind of a white elephant. They converted it into the largest film production studio in upstate New York. And they began a whole effort to attract film and television production. Just attracting Amazon Prime's Modern Love triggered 10,000 nights of overnight stay in the local hotels. Put a $100+ figure on that, and you're looking at the impact. So, this has become common across the state. Film and television production, locations, the outdoors as well as the downtowns have become the reason to bring film and television to your market. And it does create a temporary inconvenience. They're closing streets, they're doing this, but it elevates the visibility of your community. People become more aware of it. You don't just come in and take their money and say, okay, that's over and thank God the headache's gone. You say, how do we turn this into a branding opportunity for our community? All right, and the next one. It took years to take all of the disparate pieces of the Erie Canal Trail that went along the canal from when they were pulling the barges with mules and other roadway systems to create what is now the nation's largest contiguous multi-purpose trail. 750 miles that, as I like to put it, you can hike, bike, pedal, or paddle. Okay? You can go on the water, you can go on foot, you can go on a bike. The bottom line is, it is now this internationally competitive resource to attract people who love the great outdoors. I have deployed a full-time staff person to Berlin, Germany, because not only is Germany the #4 economy in the world, it's the #1 economy in Europe. They love to travel. 92% of Germans who travel internationally are fluent in English, and they spend more when they travel, but they love the outdoors. They are not the kind of person who's going to go out in the woods and eat granola, and they want to experience local cultural assets. They want to experience local cuisine. They do not like to travel with lots of other Germans on a bus. They want to experience the local culture. And so we're exploring how do we do a better job of making them aware of New York beyond New York City, which is a whole nother issue. I like to say that New York City is our international gateway. It's a tremendous resource to the state. And in a typical year, over half of the tourism spending in the state occurs in New York City. It's an enormous economic boom to us. But it has become this looming brand that overshadows the rest of the state. Anywhere in the world or other parts of the country where you go and say, I'm going to be going to New York, they assume you're going to go to New York City and stay. And, are you going to Broadway? Are you going to this museum? What do you? And from my perspective, New York City owns 99.5% of New York State's tourism brand. But conversely, they only have 1/2% of the state. 99.5% of the state is not New York City. And that's literally, do the math. And so we need to get those people, and in the case of Germans, New York is the #1 destination in the United States for Germans. 30% of them come to New York State when they're coming to the United States. And only 1% of that 30% goes beyond New York City. If they're going to experience the outdoors, they get back on a plane, they go to the Midwest, or they go to the Southwest. They go to the high-profile brands, the Grand Canyon, the Yosemites, the Yellowstones. And so one of our first posts was, did you know that the Grand Canyon, Yosemite, and Yellowstone National Parks all put together fit inside New York's Adirondack State Park? It's the largest park at 6 million acres in the 48 continental states. So, changing what people think of when they think of New York. We want them to understand that New York is a state of world-class cultural assets and the best of America's great outdoors. And we can walk that talk. We don't just talk it. Next. So, out in Rochester, they just expanded the Rochester Strong National Museum of Plate. 90,000 square foot they added to it. And they're attracting already an estimated additional 300,000 visitors a year to that city. They are now the World Hall of Fame for video games, as well as toys. And they just hosted the World Toy Makers Conference. And they're doing gaming conferences. It's whole new category of travel and business for the city of Rochester. But think about stewardship. When they developed this vision, the Strong was handicapped by the fact that it was in a very blighted part of the city of Rochester. So they got together with a series of developers, city officials, and they developed a plan not only to expand the Strong, but to create a whole new neighborhood, and it's now called the Neighborhood of Play. And it covers about 12 blocks in downtown with housing, retail, entertainment, and all kinds of activity. It's a whole new community that they built in a vision out of the museum expansion. So that's stewardship. Next. Jamestown, New York. How many of you know where Jamestown, New York is? It's way out in the toe, okay? Where New York meets Pennsylvania and Ohio, about 15 miles from the shores of Lake Erie. Beautiful lake, Chautauqua Lake. Jamestown was the birthplace of Lucille Ball. She loved her town and was passionate about it, and never really left town. Came back and visited regularly, was involved philanthropically. When she retired, she donated all of the assets from Desi Lou Studios to the town to create a Lucy Desi museum. And they opened that museum in the late 80s. And at the dedication of the museum, she said, "I'm really honored by this, I truly am. But what I really wish is would somebody build a museum like this dedicated to the art of comedy." Those words got people thinking. It took nearly 30 years. But they opened the National Comedy Center in 2018. It's now one of the top 50 museums to visit in the world. Okay? And it has transformed Jamestown by bringing visibility back to the Chautauqua Institution, which is celebrating its 150th anniversary this year. It brought visibility to the Roger Tory Peterson Institute for Wildlife Art and Environmental Studies. All the other things, Jamestown was just like, before there were TED Talks, there was the Chautauqua Institution. That's where people went to get their mind broadened and hear new ideas. Jamestown is vibrant again. It's just a wonderful thing to behold. And the National Comedy Center really recognized their stewardship commitments in this process. We go to the next one. Legoland, New York, 13 years. 13 years. First it was, do we build more high-density housing with this 600-acre farm that's for sale, or do we build an amusement park? But God bless Merlin Entertainment. They were committed, they were passionate. Legoland opened in the summer of 2021. It has transformed the county. They have actually lowered property taxes for residents. There's all kinds of anecdotes I could give you about the positive impact that they have had on that county, but it had to be managed. There were over 30 filings for people who wanted to build hotels. Well, if you just went ahead and, oh, great, yeah, no, good, no. Well, they'd be empty. I mean, this facility is only open 8 months of the year, but it's also with 7 different parts within its boundaries. They have 5 yet to open. They are building, and they are involved in workforce training. They're involved, unique ideas like working with the bus transportation companies to get them to go to neighborhoods and locations they didn't used to go to, and to the park to bring people there so that people had public transportation to come to work, and they underwrote the whole thing. I mean, it's fascinating to look at stewardship at work. Our next example, hit enter please. There you go. Our friends at the Department of Environmental Conservation looked at the state and said, we've got all these birding opportunities, but nobody knows how to find them. And this is now in the process of being developed into an app. But the map is still there. The guide is still available already. And New York has the best developed guide for birding in the country. And you say, oh, okay, birding? It was an $18 billion industry in 2018. Travel for birding in the United States. And the current estimate's around 25 billion. It's not birdseed, let's put it that way. We'll go to the next one. And it's another great outdoor resource. Another great outdoor resource. We're about to inaugurate the first National Marine Sanctuary with the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration in New York State. And it's Lake Ontario, with all the historic shipwrecks that are along New York's northern coast. I like to refer to it, New York's North Shore. And it's going to cover the county borders of 3 New York State counties. And Oswego, New York, a little town with 8,000 people, is the epicenter for that. If you are smart, you say, okay, well, do they have any other place like this? Well, they opened one in 1999 in Alpena, Michigan. How many people have ever heard of Alpena? Yeah, I didn't think so. Same size, about 8,000 people. 100,000 visitors to their visitor center last year. 100,000 people to the visitor center for the Lake Michigan National Marine Sanctuary. The numbers here would be much, much bigger. And so you've got to plan for that. You've got to be prepared for that. Next transformational change. And I think this is the last slide of its type. There were 67 vacation resorts built and permitted in the state of New York in 2022. The plans to renovate existing facilities and expand them, or create totally new facilities in virtually every county. I think the county that led in terms of the number of development projects was Greene County. So, this is an increased desire on the part of Americans to enjoy the great outdoors, and, we need to capitalize on that because we've got a lot to offer them. Can we go to the next slide? So all of these ideas don't happen by default. They happen by design. What happens by default can be very, very ugly. It can, development in certain communities across the state has run so fast that corporate purchasers of residential property for short-term rentals have priced local residents out of their own community. They're closing school districts. Right? Lake Placid can't field a hockey team. The Finger Lakes in the southern Adirondacks, similar issues. You have issues right here in Columbia County. And it's because the municipal officials need to catch up with this emerging trend. And the only way to address this, yes, you can tax them, but that doesn't stop them. They just collect the tax from the renter. And you don't want to stop it. You want to channel it. You want to control it. You want it to be strategic. You don't want it to hurt the resident. You want it to help the community in the long run. So I just talked about 67 different vacation resort developments. Those are all examples of short-term rental. Okay? But the big trend with Wall Street and other major real estate investment firms is to buy residential properties cheap, although they're pricing them beyond local buying power, in residential communities. And that's a problem, because what happens if 40% of the homes on your street are short-term rentals? In the busy season, it's a zoo, and there's parties, and there's, in the slow season, half of your neighborhood is vacant. And, sidewalks aren't shoveled, or there's all kinds of negative impacts if you don't manage it. Zoning, these areas can only be residential, they need to be owner occupied, they cannot be owned by a corporate entity. These are residential neighborhoods. But over here, we've got a place for you to invest your money. And think of, in Newark, where I was involved, Newark, I got there 40 years after the riot, and they were still talking about it. And I got very frustrated. And I said, why are you guys looking in the rearview mirror 40 years later? You have this incredible stock of historic and significant architecture, and the buildings are empty. The first time I toured 1180 Broad, they took me through the basement in a canoe. And to get me to the 24th floor, which is not the top floor, it's 35 stories, I had to go up a construction elevator outdoors and jump over the gap into the building, which I was not keen on, especially jumping back out, because the only thing was that plastic webbing, okay? But 5 years later, that was a 35-story condominium complex. It had its own subway stop in the basement. It always did, but nobody cared because nobody lived in it. It was a vacant building. But now it's like a cornerstone of residential. When I left Newark, 5,000 residential units were being developed in downtown, and they were all repurposed commercial buildings. The former headquarters of New Jersey Bell, breweries, and other buildings were being renovated for this purpose. And that's, in any community that has had troubled times, you've got vacant properties. A warehouse can become a convention center. It can become a sports facility. There are lots of ways to do that. In some cases, the best thing you do is build new, but in other cases, repurposing properties has got greater funding potential. So how do you do it by design? Well, harnessing the capacity of tourism to be a catalyst for positive change requires a shared vision for the future. Everybody's got to agree in general. I mean, the details are always going to create some controversy, but they have to agree, where do we want to go? And the leadership of the community, both the business, civic, philanthropic, they all have to share that vision, and they have to be proactive. They got to be willing to talk about things that aren't necessarily going to show return on investment this year. I started a project to convert the entire Hearst newspaper division from mechanical processing and printing and gathering of data to digital in 1989. And 8 months later, the general manager at the Times Union, which was our test market, said, when are we going to see revenue from this? And I looked at him and I said, let me give you this perspective. We are building a supersonic SST intercontinental transport that the analogy is it'll get you from where we are to Europe in 2 hours. And you're asking me when a biplane will be ready that will fly us to Springfield, Massachusetts. Building the biplane will only take us away from the project of building this epic, vehicle. And so 2 years later, we were the first newspaper in the country to do it totally digital, a daily newspaper. And we proved our point. And the thing I loved about Hearst, not one layoff. They had this philosophy, because it was family owned, that when technology changes the workforce structure, we need to right size, not downsize. So everybody who's like, you were involved in pouring metal, or you were involved in photographic reproduction and now it's digital, or you were involved in something that is no longer a viable craft, they're offered retraining. They have a choice of positions that are going to be expanded in other parts of the building. The union even gets to keep their union contributions. And, here are your choices, and none of them involve a pay cut. Those labor unions were promised that the best deal cut by any of the still viable unions is what will apply to their staff. Nobody will get a better deal because you're not able to negotiate from a position of strength. And if you don't want to make the journey with us, if you don't want to change, if you don't want to grow, then there's a standing buyout, 2 weeks pay and 2 weeks benefits for every year you served. So some people, my first sales manager back in the 70s had started at the Times Union in 1962 pouring hot metal in the foundry to cast type. So anyway, this is, I think I've covered maybe exhaustively. I'm sorry if I took too long. But the whole concept of, how tourism has to work, because if you don't make it work for you, there's too much of a possibility it will work against you. And there are communities that have been diluted because they lose their year-round residents and they become a vacation home. I think I gave you one example. There's a community in Oklahoma now. It's a resort community, great outdoors. 50,000 people living there during peak season, 200 year-round. All of the property has been bought up. The zoning laws have been abused. Properties being built where there's no zoning. It's an absolute mess.
Where is this, sorry?
This is in Oklahoma. So anyway, thank you. And
So I think I really appreciate that, you explained this, that the financial numbers are certainly extremely powerful and would indicate that Columbia County is poised to be continuing to move forward. I want to open it up to the audience and let any questions that you might have had or questions on anything we covered bring to the floor.
yes.
Hi. By the way, I'm one of the municipal elected officials.
Don't worry.
And former chair of tourism board. But what if the community is not on board? What if, everyone has to be on the same page, but what if they're just not? And there is how do you put together a plan if everyone has their own idea of what the plan should be?
Well, but you need to bring them into a room and achieve consensus. And we were at
Easy.
No problem, right?
Easier said than done. But the thing is,
That down here.
people have to hear the message. It's going to happen one way or another, whether it's your way or not. What's the best way to move forward to enhance the life of the people who live here year-round and accommodate the economic growth that's actually going to improve their lifestyle? The handout that I sent you,
I have an email.
yeah, email for everybody. It's got all those sales numbers. But the very last paragraph on the page about Columbia County says, the quality of life in Columbia County is enhanced in ways that the residents alone could never support. The cultural opportunities, the dining opportunities, they just would not exist. If you took the track and SPAC out of Saratoga, it wouldn't just change the summer. It would change the entire community permanently. All right? If you took the arena and the convention center out of Albany, same thing. If you took Division I sports out of Albany.
I mean, the city is in the process of creating a new comprehensive plan. So are there examples or models
Oh, yes.
that we could use to say, okay, these are some of the laws that we changed, these are some of the zoning that we changed, and this is how we...
And as a matter of fact, there's enabling legislation. It passed the Senate last year, but didn't get through the Assembly, and the reason was issues with New York City, which had passed its own laws. And so this year, this legislation is being proposed excluding New York City. And so we have every expectation it'll go through. And that requires the registration at the state level of every property being used for short-term rental, so that the local municipalities no. And then you have options, you know, are we gonna assess the bed tax? We should certainly be collecting sales tax. These people have to be reporting income and paying income tax on it. You know, there's this whole hidden economy in that category. And I'm a fan of short-term rental. On the very good side, it enables people to become first-time homeowners because they can generate some income off the property if they think like an entrepreneur. It enables some people to stay in their home longer than they otherwise could have because they're generating income and not just dependent upon a retirement income. It enables a local entrepreneur to buy several properties and manage them. It's a local business. They're working with local people. The money stays in your community. As you move, though, from the very good towards the other end, there are people, you know, they buy it, it's a vacation property, they're here for 2 weeks of the year, and it's either vacant or rented to other people in the season to help pay for it. There's nothing wrong with having a second home. But you need to have rules about how's that property managed. And, you know, those people are generating income. It's got to be on the books. It's got to be legitimately managed, and the property should be treated as a rental property in terms of, you know, housing and other codes. But on the other extreme, you have corporate America bidding in a war they can't lose against local residents for residential property. And they just need to be told, you can't buy property in these neighborhoods. They're residential. You can't have commercially owned property if it's a residence. And you need to protect your neighborhoods. And there's capacity to do those things come with this law. And it's not that it's going to be easy, but the revenue that it would generate will more than overcome the cost of making it happen. And that's, you know, that's just one thing, one category. Yes?
So I have two questions. One is about your zoning suggestion, which is how does that prevent? I mean, a lot of property owners who own rental properties are going to incorporate for liability purposes, right? But you're saying that a corporation, that zoning allows.
If it's rented year-round.
If it's rented year-round.
That's different. It's
Okay.
a residence, it's year-round residential, you know, but you can't buy an individual residence for short-term rental as a corporate entity.
Are there municipalities that have that zoning on the books?
In different parts of the country,
In
yes.
different parts of the country. but-
Yeah, and that's, we're looking, actually, our organization is contemplating holding a short-term rental summit after the legislative session to go over best practice and what's being done to resolve the issue. New York is way behind the curve.
Right.
The rest of the country. My family, my grandparents lived on Cape Cod. You know, you want to talk about being overrun in the season, but, you know, literally there are public beaches and there are resident beaches in every town. There's access guaranteed. There's a privilege given to the people who are there year-round. There are tax breaks given to the people who are there year-round in order to sustain the fact that they are a year-round community. So,
And then my second question, thank you for that. So a lot of the issues in a place like Hudson, and I think, Christian, you know, you run a hotel, sorry to put you on the spot, is that, you know, and I spoke to another hotel operator who said Hudson is not a destination that has arrived yet. We are a weekend in-season destination, right? So a lot of the tourism activity that happens in season on the weekends, right? So if you are a member of the workforce, if you are an operator of a hotel, that is a rhythm that you want to expand. If you are a member of the workforce here, that means that a lot of your income is coming in sort of a gig way on the weekends in the season, but then for the rest of the year, you know, that doesn't pan out as well. So what are some of the things that municipalities should be doing?
if you look at what they're doing in Saratoga, Schenectady, Albany, you know, they think proactively about creating reasons to visit.
Mm-hmm.
I think they just had their Chowder Fest in Saratoga, you know, and literally it highlights the local dining establishments and things like that. But, you know, Victorian strolls in the Christmas season brought people back downtown from the malls. You know, sometimes the challenge to the city isn't, you know, vacation seasonality, it's a change in how people behave and shopping characteristics. So you have to have a better game plan. I was involved with Saratoga Race Course, doing my role with HERS, when they were going to close it in the early 80s because of lack of attendance. It is now the most attended in terms of average daily attendance thoroughbred race meet in the country. And it's not because everybody loves horse racing. It's because we created the August place to be. Every foundation, charity, every hospital, every college, every museum has to have their day at the races. There are daily activities on the campus of the race course for families with rides and activities for children. The picnic grounds were better established to make it a more welcoming place to spend the day and enjoy the outdoors. And does mom or dad or some of the adult children play some betting? Yes, and it does help the betting handle. But it became a destination unto itself, not just a racetrack. And then you build things around it, you know, the SPAC, the polo season, opening the Museum of Dance, the Museum of Racing, the car museum in Saratoga. These wouldn't exist if you weren't building them around something that's already bringing 2 million people to Saratoga in 6 weeks. And they're hosting another race this year, Belmont, in June. So we'll see how that works out. Anyway.